Hi, Alejandro. Welcome to Hashed.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for having me.
Today, we have an exciting podcast for everyone who is watching our Hodl channel. We have the founder of Mooncheck and also a very dear friend of mine, Alejandro Vargas. Okay, so let's get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself for the audience. I know that you've originally started as a securities lawyer. Tell us a little bit about the journey thus far.
Great. Yeah. I guess maybe I'll start from the beginning and up to now. I did start my career as a securities lawyer, as you mentioned, at two of the most prominent firms in the world, Skadden and Davis Polk. I worked in various countries for both firms, and through the course of like the 8 years of me practicing securities law, I obviously had a pretty solid sort of foundation in the securities law space. After that, I actually like jumped off and went and did something totally different, and I became an entrepreneur. And I built an e-commerce platform that I took from like through various funding rounds and just grew, which gave me the foundation to kind of just be more of a tech entrepreneur. And then what happened is that at some point I decided that I wanted to do something new, and we actually talked at the time, and I had been already like delving into blockchain as an amateur investor and just very interested in the technology. And so when we had a conversation back then, and you mentioned, you know, you should be doing something in the space for transparency, and kind of putting together your legal background and your technology background together, you know, I went to the drawing board and came up with the idea of creating a platform that encouraged the provision of really disclosure for crypto companies, but to make it easier for them to do so, you know, we decided to implement AI into the platform, and that's Mooncheck. Right now, I'm also currently an entrepreneur in residence at Hashed, building this particular product.
Great. I think there are tons to unpack in what you've just said.
Yeah.
So let's kind of dive back and start with what was the kind of the problem statement that you would say is, you know, prevalent in the crypto market that you've witnessed coming from more of a traditional background?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is something that we have talked about for a while, and even for me as an individual who had invested in the space and that had actually experienced also loss in the space due to a lot of like lack of transparency, it was evident that there was a need for something that allowed people to understand what they were getting into, what they were investing into, just like you would with a security. And I'm not saying, for the record, I don't want to be hated in this space. I'm not saying that cryptos are securities, and certainly not all cryptos are securities, but in certain ways they behave similarly, especially in the sense that you're allowing the public to come in and own, you know, cryptocurrencies that have behind them a project, an idea, a company that, you know, for many people that are investing into these cryptos, they should really begin to understand. And this problem had become so big, and the problem of transparency in crypto, with like the amount of fraud that there is in the space, the bad name that it has right now, it really needed something where people could simply read enough about the projects that they were investing into. And one of the things that I personally realized is that there wasn't anything, there's just no platform out there where you can go and read the full story of a particular project in the crypto space. And so you end up trying to go everywhere, trying to piece together the story about like what you're about to put your significant amount of money into, and you don't really get that full picture. There's a lot of products out there already that kind of do the on-chain stuff too, but the on-chain stuff for like the regular person, like your typical member of the public that is just like a little bit interested in crypto, potentially wanting to put a little bit of money into it, it's also stuff that just goes over your head like immediately. You don't understand how to read that data necessarily. And so for me, it was really kind of focusing on the more typical qualitative descriptions of what these projects were doing, the risks involved, and just having that full picture of everything that's supposed to be material for me to be able to make a decision to put money into a particular token or crypto. So that's really where the problem is, and I think that's a problem that like we see. It's one of these areas. Normally, you wouldn't have the ability as a normal person of the public to kind of like get a little piece of financial investment or benefit or participation, let's just call, in a particular company or project at those stage of companies. But crypto does that. It basically, what it does is that it allows the public to participate in these like new emerging company economies that normally people wouldn't be able to participate in, because that's usually reserved for like more institutional investors. So it created that opportunity where you finally you needed to kind of break that informational asymmetry that exists, where you couldn't have like the VCs in the space coming in and investing a lot of money into these projects with the full benefit of due diligence and questioning of the people that are involved, versus the public that is coming in right after the VCs, or sometimes even like somewhat simultaneously with the VCs, not having the benefit of the same level of information. So leveling the playing field of information was an important part of it.
So would it be accurate if I were to kind of summarize the main goal as directly attacking the problem of information asymmetry, especially for those retail investors who may not have as much, access?
Yeah, I think that's the basic premise of it, is just tackling that informational asymmetry, and not only with investors, but also with insiders, right? And that's also something that securities laws tries to do. It's just making sure that the people that are like putting money into an investment, your shares of stock that come out in an IPO, for you to have enough information before you actually make that decision. It's just fundamental when you're actually putting money into any type of financial instrument.
So then how would you tie this kind of disclosure regime coming from like the securities market, and how would you apply that to crypto? And then ultimately, what benefit would a consumer get out of using Mooncheck, for instance?
So there's two sort of angles to Mooncheck, because there's the individual public user that wants the information and craves that information, wants a place where they can just come in and read about a project. And there's also the other side, which is the actual projects themselves. Right now, we have a regulatory environment in crypto where, even though it hasn't crystallized entirely, we at least know that the primary concern of the majority of regulators around the world is disclosure. And you have these already existing kind of disclosure regimes, most of them based essentially in like the securities laws, although you can also say that there's disclosure requirements even like for products like the consumer protection space, but focus on the more complete disclosure requirements, which is really the main point of attention right now in the space, which is securities law disclosure requirements. We knew that we had to kind of also take a little bit of like a proactive approach in trying to create, while the space evolves, trying to create a disclosure standard that makes sense for crypto companies, because that's part of the tension that we have right now. You have like the SEC coming in with like the traditional securities disclosure regime, trying to impose it on the crypto companies, but it doesn't necessarily work well, because crypto companies are just very different, even in the way that they're structured, even in the whole decentralized nature of the space. It's something that you can't just take like that existing regime and just plug it in without a problem to it. So for us, we decided, okay, well, first let's go back to the drawing board, see what regulators are worried about, think about what the space is also worried about, and also what parties within the space know, like talking to the VCs, talking to exchanges, talking to different like members of this community to see what matters in terms of disclosure. What should projects be disclosing? What should they be talking about? And come up with a disclosure standard. Now, it's for Mooncheck. Yes, we're aiming for the creation of regulatory aligned disclosure. It's not like at the beginning, although we do plan on having the ability to potentially become fully compliant with as regulations come out, for example, with MiCA, but initially we're just trying to make them regulatory aligned. That means that our disclosure standard of Mooncheck is more, it's more general, because what we want is just transparency according to what the industry itself believes is the most important stuff to share with people. So how it ties in really is that we hope that, one, we are close enough with our own disclosure standard to what's coming, because we have obviously like a very close ear to the ground and checking what's happening with regulators, so that whatever we're doing on Mooncheck and whatever the projects are coming in and like completing information on Mooncheck, they're going to already have a leg up in terms of disclosure from what will be like really required of them pretty soon. Because I know that a lot of people are thinking, well, there's no regulation yet. Well, it's coming and it's inevitable. And because we know that the majority of these regulators are focused on disclosure, you might as well start at work, because it's very true that like disclosure regimes have a lot of commonalities like within them. And we're just trying to hit at least those common things that we know are going to come up in the disclosure regimes to make sure that the projects know what to do, because that's the other piece of the problem. We talked about users already. The problem with projects is that delivering disclosure, it's an expensive process. I mean, you know, I'm a lawyer, we've worked together, you're a lawyer, like paying for lawyers to actually help you to deliver disclosure, it's an incredibly expensive process that normally only like companies that are at the level of becoming ready for an IPO are able to shoulder in terms of cost. So we don't want that to be like a hurdle for transparency in the space. The reality is that you have like companies in crypto that are like two guys in their basement trying to put together a project and issuing a token. And they're not going to be out there like paying for expensive lawyers to create disclosure that is regulatory compliant at this stage. We have to be realistic about what's happening in the space. So provide them a path, an easy path where they can still be transparent, because anything is better than nothing, and give them that guidance that they require to be able to deliver that level of disclosure, right? Like a certain level of disclosure. So that's what we're ultimately trying to do. One, deliver the right information to the public by making it easy for the projects at the stage that they're at right now to deliver the right level of disclosure to the public.
Great. And so you mentioned that the kind of standards that you are developing yourself are based on a lot of the principles that are common to the disclosure regime. And I think the first example that I can think of that probably will be applicable to you would be the EU's MiCA legislation.
Yeah.
So could you tell us how you try to instill or distill the principles behind disclosure within the MiCA legislation, and how are they reflected on your standards in Mooncheck?
Yeah, so I would say that the Mooncheck standard goes a bit beyond the MiCA disclosure requirements. And by disclosure requirements under MiCA, we really mean the white paper requirements, which are basically disclosure. They're outlined with a certain degree of detail, but it's not kind of like a huge sort of thing, but there's enough there that we were able to kind of incorporate almost all of that into our disclosure requirements. But it's also in a broader context of also US securities laws, to be honest, because that's something that hasn't moved. And unfortunately, the attention that the companies are getting right now, the crypto companies and projects, is really kind of from the SEC as well. People are worried about that. So we knew that if we took kind of like a more strict approach with disclosure, we could pretty much fit all of the MiCA standards within that and provide a product ultimately that would allow like the projects from day one to kind of just focus also on the ones that they need to be able to do under MiCA. So the only thing that is different, obviously, like, and where we had to kind of adjust, and we did look at MiCA a lot for those types of like guidelines, is things that just are very different from your traditional like securities regime, like the description of the token, for example. Like that's something that is very specific to tokens. Yes, there's description of securities, or like, for example, description of the notes in a bond offering, but it's just different. And the SEC's like kind of guidance in that respect, like it's not very helpful for the crypto companies to know what to do with their own tokens. So we're kind of looking at Mika to do that. We're also looking at Mika more like the governance front for tokens, things that are just very, very specific to crypto companies. We have looked more at Mika than other kind of securities regimes of disclosure.
Okay. So I think to summarize, I think there are two ultimate benefits. So for a regular retail user, you would have this platform where you have all the combined information about a particular project or a token in one space. You will probably be able to see a lot of the updates, what's changed. And I think those are some of the features that would benefit me as a retail investor. On the other side, as you've said, the project, you are trying to add more unique features to Mooncheck so that you are trying to make this facilitate this process so that it's easier for them to do. Can you tell us a little bit about some of these unique features that would enable the projects to come up with a disclosure themselves?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because that's something that we kind of thought about a lot in terms of how do we actually deliver something that's easy to use for the projects and for people that many times, look, there's language differences because projects are all over the world, so not everybody like has English that will allow them to write proper disclosure level text, and also just like sometimes you have these highly technical people that are involved in the space that might have a hard time also distilling some of the more complex technical concepts that they're utilizing in their projects into something that is digestible for the public. So when thinking about how to do that, that's when we decided to actually incorporate the use of AI. So there's two things that make it easier for projects to actually deliver disclosure. One is the use of AI. What we do is that you have your main sections of disclosure. So like you have your risk factors, your business section, token, governance, history and structure, right? All of these big sections. Within those sections, there's subsections. And we have then broken down the subsections into small objectives. So we're trying to almost gamify the creation of disclosure for the projects, where you go into the business section, you click on something on a subsection, and you have like, these are your 5 objectives to talk about your strategies. And you click on the first objective and it will walk you through like a conversation. Essentially, the AI interviews you. And this is where like my experience as a securities lawyer comes from, because I knew what it took to actually draft disclosure as a lawyer, a proper like securities level disclosure. And it really entails you doing first a lot of obviously due diligence and sort of like reading a lot about these particular companies and their contracts and everything. But a very important piece of it to be able to write the main narrative about like a company is actually sitting down with the people in the company and get enough information from them for you to be able to actually write that disclosure. So for me, I decided, well, let's have like the AI emulate that process and become the interviewer to just tease out enough information from the individual that's involved in the project that knows enough for then the AI to be able to write disclosure in a disclosure type of tone, right? So that's essentially what the AI does. You go into that objective, it starts asking you some simple questions. You can write in a very like normal tone. You can chat with it. You don't need to have perfect English. As long as like the concept is coming through, the AI is able to then deliver disclosure when it knows that it has enough information to actually do so based on certain parameters that we've given it. Those parameters tie into our disclosure standard and also obviously like the regulations that are behind some of those standards that we've written. So that's one of them, like the AI. But the other piece that we're building into the platform, which I will not be able to show to like the AI I'll show today. The other piece that I will not show today is more of the contribution side. What we want, I mean, the blockchain industry is driven a lot by community. And so we and a lot of it is decentralized still. So we do want to have like the community also contribute to the disclosure. There's people in the community and part of these like super strong blockchain communities that know a lot about what's happening, and have the ability to write. So in some sense, we're building in some wiki type of functions where somebody from the community can come in and write a piece of the disclosure based on, again, those same objectives. If like those are going to be viewable for someone to come in and say, well, I've read the white paper. I'm part of like the DAO. I know about this. I'm going to go ahead and write a paragraph about it. And that way, the projects don't have to just have, like, if you're too decentralized, you can utilize your community to still advance disclosure to the public. And if you're like a bit more centralized, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't have the bandwidth, if you are those two guys sitting in a garage building a token, but you have a strong community, you can leverage also the community to come in and write some disclosure for you to be able to deliver that transparency.
Mm-hmm. So that's a lot, first of all, but an honorable goal nonetheless. And so, since I'm a visual learner, and perhaps our audience as well, maybe we should show them how the AI works.
So let's do this. I will warn like the viewing public. This is our first prototype. There are certain things in the UI that we're obviously still working on, but at least it'll give you an idea of the general kind of structure of this, and also how that AI component works. So let me share my screen. All right. So,
by the way, this is the first time that you're revealing this to the public, right?
Yes, this is the first time I'm revealing this to the public, so I really hope it goes well. But I've created a project page. So the idea here is that projects can come in, create like essentially their own pages. I created one for this podcast. And as you can see, the general structure of the homepage for the project just includes certain features. And you can see here a bit of that breakdown that I was mentioning with the disclosure sections, and a bit of a description of what that section is. And then under it, like the subsections that have certain objectives. So like as I was mentioning, that's the business section. You go into the strategy section, and then you have your disclosure objectives, including a bar that shows you how far along you are in terms of disclosure. And maybe we're going to need a battery, like a plug soon here. But maybe we can do this and sort of go through one of the objectives together.
That could be really fun.
Okay, so we're going to go through one of the objectives together here within. And here, when you click into it, it just basically tells you that the Mooncheck AI will basically walk you through this, warns you to be truthful about things, and then it gives you guidance specifically about what this objective is, the objective being articulate the project's mission, right? So once you go and got it, then the AI starts working, and it gives you the first sort of question in the interview, which is, could you describe your project's mission in simple terms? And by the way, we have never entered this information into this. So whatever the product spits out is what it would in a real situation.
Okay. So let's say I want to create a community-based K-pop idol.
Okay. We are crypto pop. A K-pop idol group. And what's the mission in simple terms of this K-pop idol group?
So we want to enable the public to,
fans.
Yeah, like enable fans to make direct decisions about what kind of songs the group is going to play, what kind of style, what kind of dance.
Songs, dance,
concert days,
clothing, concerts.
Yeah. So enabling the fans to make a lot of the decisions.
The group does. Okay, so we are CryptoPop. We are CryptoPop. Sorry, CryptoPop, a K-pop idol group that enables the fans to make direct decisions about what kind of songs, dance, clothing, like concerts, etc. the group does. That's the sort of like basic mission. We're going to go basic here because you can write a lot more and the AI will take whatever you write, right? So briefly describe how you plan to achieve your mission, by what means.
Okay. So let's say we are going to sell physical copies of NFT, let's say in convenience stores. And then once users are able to use those NFTs and get governance tokens on the CryptoPops platform, then basis their pro rata share of governance tokens, they will be eligible to vote and make decisions on the proposals.
Pro rata voting power. Based on how many tokens, how many governance tokens they have, this will allow them to vote on proposals.
Yeah, set forth by the management.
Set forth by the management group. And I guess I'm gonna write kind of very like sloppily, and then the group has to do what the vote says.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do that. So the AI obviously at this point is thinking and is processing the information and figuring out whether or not it has enough to provide essentially that first draft of disclosure and this particular point. So sometimes it will take a little, but once it's there, it basically tells you, I'm ready to produce your draft disclosure. Is there anything else you want to add before I do so? For the purposes of this, we're going to just say no. And then it starts essentially generating that first draft, where it basically gives you the draft disclosure. We at CryptoPop are a K-pop idol group with a mission to empower our fans by enabling them to directly influence our creative choices. This includes decisions about our songs, dance routines, clothing, concerts, etc., right? And then achieving your mission, our approach to achieving this mission involves the utilization of blockchain technology. Specifically, we plan to distribute NFTs, which can be purchased at convenience stores. Once the NFTs are utilized, users receive governance tokens. So it basically gives you a much better written disclosure level style narrative that then you can just go and publish. And once you publish it, then in your disclosure here, it will appear under strategies, your mission, and people will be able to come and read it and leave comments and like this particular section. And that way, like, so then when you obviously then go back into sort of the disclosure areas, you're going to see that you've completed a certain percentage of your strategies. This particular objective is completed, your bar has moved a bit, and you can move on to the next conversation with the AI. And that way, little by little, you're going to build a proper full-blown disclosure with all the bits and pieces that, you know, we consider to be important as part of this disclosure standard that we're building. So that's basically it. I mean, I don't know if you want anything else on this, but that's the basics of how this actually works.
Okay. I mean, I think this is really amazing because I think, as you've said, a lot of the times projects would spend hours and hours with lawyers to trying to explain, get that written down,
exactly,
edit it. And so you spend numerous hours just working on this first draft, but then essentially what you've done is you've replaced the need for it. And then you just type as much as you know.
Yep.
And then you will have a workable draft from which you can try to edit, make some updates and changes. So it sounds all incredibly very convenient and very effective.
It is, and that's the whole purpose of it, and that's what we're aiming for. And it doesn't really matter here because we're not, like, we understand that many projects might not be at that level where they're ready to do a full-blown regulatory compliant play. We understand that anything is better than nothing. So whatever you want to write and you're ready to write, it'll be able to deliver it, but that's better. And you're still moving in the right direction of becoming more transparent. And as you continue to add information into this, then the AI just helps you in putting it in an organized way, like where people then can come into your page and read everything about you.
Okay. So essentially you have you're building crypto, Wikipedia, also with the contribution function, perhaps more like a LinkedIn. And then also, okay, so you have all these like functionalities that are basically enabling people to make informed choices and giving them a centralized place where all the information can be found about a particular project.
Correct. The part of the community too also comes into play because once you have the disclosure, we don't want this to sit in a type of like Edgar database where it's like quite obscure. The UX is, kind of horrible. We want it to be very user-friendly and for the community to be able to come in and see a piece of information, a piece of disclosure, and be able to even make a comment on it or ask a question of that project so that then the project can come in and also use AI to help them respond to that community comment, to just make it easier to give also responses to people that are based on the information that they've gathered through these conversations with the AI, so that they know that it comes from the same place, it comes kind of consistent with a tone, and they don't have to kind of like make a constant effort about how do we answer this question without like creating a ton of FUD or like expectations that shouldn't be created at this point, because everything is coming from the one central space where you've collected all of this beautiful information through conversations with an AI.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is certainly an exciting start. And we hope to learn more about how Mooncheck grows. And I know KBW is coming next week, and then Token 2049 in Singapore afterwards. So I wish you a good luck on your journey. I would like to end by asking two more questions, if that's okay. Sorry about that. We're back with a renewed battery charging situation. Okay, so I wanted to ask you two more questions before we end the interview. So the first question, I think, is how Mooncheck is placed within the global regulatory approach is going to be pretty important. Yeah. So we've talked about EU MiCA legislation and how there's like a white paper disclosure regime. So arguably, in the global trends, they are coming up with a bespoke regime for crypto assets. Yeah. The UK is taking a slightly different approach. I think academics would call that more of a like retrofitted regulation in which they're expanding upon the existing financial instrument regulations to include crypto assets under the same regime. Correct. How would you compare these two models of regulatory approach happening simultaneously? And what would that mean for Mooncheck?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously Mooncheck, by sort of endeavoring to develop a new standard for disclosure, has gone in the bespoke direction. But it is also true that in order to actually do that, we've looked back and looked at the regulations that exist, because the reality is that there's very well-established regimes in the world that deal with very, very similar situations to the one we have with crypto. And it's not necessary to kind of just like wipe all of that clean and start from zero. So whether or not you retrofit or you kind of come up with a bespoke approach to regulating crypto, I don't think, I don't think it matters so much. I think the answer really is kind of somewhere in the middle. And I think that's sort of how we've looked at it also with Mooncheck, where you need to look at certain things that have really worked in terms of like, investor and consumer protection stuff with like securities laws, for example. But at the same time, there's things that just simply don't work there, where you need to actually come up with a more tailored approach. The UK has essentially like the approach is the same risk, same policy approach to regulating, and it makes sense. Like what I was saying earlier, where you have people kind of participating in these financial instruments that have like companies behind them or projects behind them, like doing certain things. It's very similar to some other things, and the risks that it entails are actually the same risks sometimes. So they've taken that same approach, but it is a hybrid. It's not an entirely, I would not consider it an entirely retrofitted model, because the FSM bill has basically said that the prospectus regulation of the EU is no longer going to be used for crypto assets, and they have to come up with another kind of disclosure regime for crypto assets. So I think they've taken an approach that actually is similar to Mooncheck in that sense, thinking that the risks are pretty similar, but the disclosure approach needs to be like tailored, and that's the way that they're going into. MiCA is a little bit different because even though they take a lot of cues from existing regulation in order to actually like put together that regulation, it is more unique and much more fully tailored, and it takes into consideration a lot more things that are unique to the space compared to like the UK's approach.
Okay, so if I were to kind of boil down what you've said, is that both MiCA and the UK, they are taking some sort of a tailored approach to crypto assets.
Yeah.
And I guess what probably would be the most natural question for the audience, maybe, what if these standards are different from EU MiCA versus UK? But then essentially what you've told us is that given your experience in the securities market, given your experience working in various jurisdictions, the same principles permeate. And so what you have distilled is essentially the common aspects to what the regulators are worried about, not only for securities, but also for crypto. And you've made that into a Mooncheck platform through which more users are able to efficiently create first drafts of their disclosure.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So, but to your point, I think what Mooncheck is doing is also what like lawyers tend to do in the traditional like disclosure space, where many times they take the most conservative approach to disclosure. So even if you're doing like a securities offering in a different country, as long as you're including, for example, like US investors anywhere, even if it's not through, like even if you're exempted from registration, which, like you have all of the full registration statement requirements under like, the US securities laws, even then, lawyers take an approach of let's go and sort of do a full-blown registration statement level disclosure, regardless of whether or not we're selling, for example, directly into the US to the public, right? And yes, there's minor differences, but and this will only kind of be meaningful perhaps to like US securities lawyers, but even when you're doing a Reg S only deal that is not even sold to like institutional investors in the US that are part of one of those exceptions, many lawyers choose to take the more conservative approach and do a full-blown disclosure, even though they don't really have to technically to follow the law. So Mooncheck has taken a more conservative approach to make sure that it covers more than less. And I think ultimately with these different types of regimes coming out for the projects that are operating on a global basis and are listed in multiple like exchanges around the world, I think it'll be natural for many of them to take the more conservative approach.
And I think more conservative meaning more areas for disclosure.
Correct.
And I think that's, given the jurisdictional variance, you're probably covering almost all the variants.
Yeah, and that's the idea. And there's always going to be some more unique ones, but I think depending on where like your activity is as a project, you're going to kind of focus on that particular piece that needs to be added. But the bulk of it is going to cover a very significant amount of the regulatory concerns, at least from a disclosure standpoint, globally.
Okay. And I think that is especially important for an asset that is able to travel globally. It's not restricted by national borders. So I think having this globally appropriate standard is going to be very powerful.
Yeah.
And so hopefully Mooncheck will be at the frontier of promoting this new paradigm of disclosure system.
That's what we hope.
Okay, so one last question for you before we end the interview, which is not related to Mooncheck, so feel free to be as personal as you would like. Tell us something that makes you unique as a founder, and what are some of the strengths that you can draw from that experience?
Wow.
Sorry to put you
this
on.
was a plan. Unique strengths as a founder. I mean, I think it's a couple of things. I think generally my background is fairly unique as a founder. I think I have a combination of factors, including my sort of international experience in general, and the legal background as well, that makes me more unique of a founder. It's not like I'm the only one out there, but there's less of us, I would say, with that type of background. So it gives me a bit of perspective, I feel, in a different way from other founders. And I guess the other thing that I would say for the space is rather unique. I wouldn't say fully unique, but the level of maturity and the experience that I've had overall. Crypto and blockchain and this space tends to be very young, and I think I'm coming at this from a place with a lot more track record, and that makes me a bit different, I would say. Those two factors combined, I think, make me a unique founder of sorts. Yeah. It's a tough question because you're asking me to brag about myself, and I can't get there.
Well, we'll note humbleness as one of your strengths. Okay. And on that note, I think it's really opportune that you've been developing this for quite a while now, actually.
Yeah.
And so you are, successfully launching your first prototype during KBW, and I think timing is really aligned very well, because I think, as you said, the blockchain industry is quite young, but I think it's been mature.
Yeah.
And so there is a little bit of a convergence between the blockchain and the traditional market coming in. There is a level of maturity that is happening for the overall ecosystem, and I think the timing works out perfectly, because I think there is a greater awareness for regulatory compliance. And I think this is a wonderful solution to that. So thank you for driving this initiative. Thank you for joining our HODL podcast.
Thank you, Jin.
And I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.